Hello, everybody. We're excited to have you here today for the webinar titled ECM to Content Services, Is It Just Horses for Courses? Today, our presenter is Glenn Gibson from Highland Software. Just before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go over. You'll notice that right now all the phone lines are muted. We are recording this session, so to make that recording as clean as possible, we're going to keep the lines muted. If you have a question, though, we would love to hear from you, so feel free to type in any questions that you think of into the GoToMeeting chat panel, and we'll get to as many as we can during our Q&A portion of this webinar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Glenn to get us started.
Thanks very much, Rayanne. Yeah, this topic is an interesting one. There's so much change that's happening in the industry that was known as enterprise content management. And there's a lot of discussion in the industry about what this really means. And that's what this webinar and this presentation is intended to address. So I'm going to start off with a phrase. The phrase is faster horses. And this is actually perhaps an urban legend, but is reportedly the answer to a question. But what was the question? Well, it was said that Henry Ford made the comment, if he'd asked people in the early 1900s how they would have improved transportation, they would have said faster horses. Now, of course, obviously, Henry Ford had something different in mind than a better breed of equestrian animal. He had a whole concept in mind about taking cars and making them affordable to the masses. And this quote is often used to help people think differently and to innovate about things. So the status quo at the time was a horse and buggy, and this whole different paradigm shift, which really gave birth to a whole new industry. Because what this quote is helping people appreciate is no matter how much investment in exercise techniques or dietary regimes that would be applied to horses, that never would have helped people to think differently about this challenge of public or personal transportation. So of course, Henry Ford had this vision, and from there, a whole new industry was born. Now, there's no such thing as a Gartner Magic Quadrant or a Forrester Wave for car manufacturers, but if there was one, it perhaps would look like this today. Now, these logos have been placed on here randomly, so it's not up for debate, and this is just supposed to illustrate the fact that from the early 1900s, this whole new industry was born. But Ford has remained a leading manufacturer. So the question is, are we all still driving Ford Model Ts today? Well, of course we're not driving Ford Model Ts, because with any established industry, there has to be continual innovation that's happening in that specific space. But then every so often, something like this happens. A disruptor comes along. Tesla are changing people's expectations of what a car can be. An all-electric car is no longer just a sensible environmental choice. It's actually really, really cool. Now, whether Tesla is going to be the spark of a whole new mode of personal transportation, time will tell. But the point is that there is a disruption happening in this industry that people can't afford to ignore. So why am I blabbing on here about car manufacturers in the automotive industry? Well, it's because in the industry that we know and love, as I mentioned, the industry around managing enterprise information, there is a certain amount of disruption. Back in December 2016, Gartner made the bold proclamation that the term that was relatively well understood in a very defined marketplace of enterprise content management is now dead and no longer relevant, and was being replaced by a term content services. So the question that we're going to address in this entire presentation is this just a change in words? Is it just a change in terminology, or is there something more to it? Does it involve a change of thinking about a different way to address a challenge, as we've been talking about so far with the faster horses comment? So here's an interesting statement about the technology of ECM and where this technology had got to. Back in 2015, Gartner issued a report that said that organizations averaged more than 6 ECM products, while some large organizations had up to 20. And there was also a small section of the report that had over 100 different applications that were considered ECM. So clearly, there was a trend that was happening where people were looking to manage enterprise information and start throwing more ECM technology at the problem. So is that the right way to think? Well, this presentation, you might be wondering why it's called, is it just horses for courses? So what does that expression mean and where does it come from? Well, I am from Scotland and therefore British, according to my passport, and that is a British expression which is really often used to urge someone to stick to the thing that they know the best. So when we ask ourselves a question, and this applies to us as a vendor and you as someone who has a career managing enterprise information and delivering solutions out to your business, is this shift from ECM to content services just a change in words where we're going to carry on doing the same thing, applying a same set of ECM technologies to our information management problems or challenges, or are we going to think differently? That's really the crux of the conversation. So what we're going to do is take a lesson from the transportation industry, and we're going to try to get our heads around and understand what happened in people's minds from the place where a horse and buggy was the norm and the status quo for how people got themselves around, all the way through to people's expectations today, which is driving a very comfortable personal car and what those might look like in the future. Because the fact is, and this is true of the automotive industry, but it's also very true of the enterprise content management industry from the IT landscape, that change is inevitable. And when changes in technology occur, people's expectations change, and that has to change how things get designed and delivered. So I'll recap that a little second, because that's the whole kind of purpose and agenda that we're going to talk through. Changes in technology change people's expectations, which change how things get designed and delivered. And this is not a one-time thing. This is a constant paradigm. You could almost look at this as circular, because it's an ever-evolving change. And we're going to ask the question with content services, is there a change in technology involved which really changes people's expectations, which has to impact what we do? So let's talk about changes in technology first, as it relates to the industry that has become known as enterprise content management. We're going to start with a date in mind, which is 1991. Now, this is kind of just right in the middle of the late 80s, early 90s, and it happens to be the year that Highland Software was founded. And this is actually one of our architectural drawings. And we were one of many vendors who were kind of given birth to the document management industry that became ECM over time. What was the technology landscape like in 1991? Well, these things were kind of very popular. These were dumb terminals connected to mainframes in the back end. This was a model of centralized computing power where organizations, IT shops, would invest in big, heavy, powerful mainframe servers. All the software would be installed there, and then the end users would get these dumb terminals that were cheap and relatively cheap and easily replaceable. But look at the user experience. All users had the same text-based experience. And for organizations that wish to implement a software change, it often took weeks or months, if ever, for that software vendor to make the change on the mainframe side that would then be rolled out to all users. So that was kind of the technology landscape. It's no wonder then that the next major innovation that happened, that of the PC, why that became so popular. A completely different paradigm and a completely different user experience. This was one of a decentralized computing model. And what we mean by that is all the computing power now was sitting on this box on someone's desk. And these machines were capable of doing a lot. In this case, personal applications were developed, and it gave people a much more flexible user experience. And also, this happened to be the paradigm where our first version of our own software, OnBase, was invented. And the same thing is true of many types of software that became known as enterprise content management. The user experience was much better than that of a dumb terminal, and it gave users a way to work efficiently with the information. And interestingly enough, our very first solution was taking text output from a mainframe through code processing and parsing that out and making it available for an end user to navigate, find the information that they needed to get their jobs done much more efficiently than the other user experience. But then technology continued to shift because these desktop PCs were very expensive at first and cost prohibitive to roll out to every employee. Over time, end user PCs became cheaper and lighter weight. The technology of the internet really became viable, and then organizations started to look at their IT environments and shift over back to a more centralized computing model with a client-server environment. So in this case, they were looking for investing in less computing power on the desks of the employees and investing again in heavier servers. And that was the paradigm where we as a software vendor had to innovate and think differently about how we delivered our software. And we came out with a web client version of our software, as did many other vendors in this space at the time. Now, this client-server model is still very much in place today, but there's been continued innovation happen to make these servers much more efficient, much more secure, much more powerful in nature. On the client end as well, innovations with browsers that allow a zero footprint rollout of a user experience by means of a browser. Even the heavier desktop client on our behalf as a vendor has been re-architected to take advantage of that back-end computing power while allowing still some of that heavier processing. So Microsoft came out with a set of technologies such as the Windows presentation layer that allowed a whole rich client experience to be on the client side and talk to these servers on the back end. So the whole point here is along the way with software design as it relates to enterprise content management and other enterprise applications, the available technology of the day significantly shifted how software was designed and delivered. Now we're going to take a step away from this for a second and talk about the next major kind of innovation that happened in IT environments, and that was one of virtualization. This was a technology championed by companies like VMware and Citrix and Microsoft that allowed people to recognize incredible cost savings in their environments. So in the world of ECM, let's say that somebody wanted to implement a web-based ECM product, and they were told you need to have 2 application servers for load balancing, you need to have 2 separate web servers. That would have required them on the traditional architecture side to invest in 4 physical servers, to install them in their environments, and to manage these 4 pieces of hardware and install those applications. Of course, on the right-hand side, this concept of virtualization allowed investment in 1 physical server and then allowed these applications to run in a much more consolidated way. So again, even us at Highland Software, we implemented virtualization in our own server infrastructures with our own IT department. We had whole rooms that were previously filled with rack servers that were eliminated because we were able to consolidate down onto a relatively few number. Now, for us as a software vendor, this did not change how we implemented our software at all. Of course, our customers asked us, hey, can we virtualize these servers? And this was a slide that we pulled from a presentation with one of our user conferences from a number of years ago, where we really just were able to stand up and say, yes, you can. We support these environments because these environments are replicating a kind of a physical environment. The one change for us as a vendor, the one slight change that we had to make was at first we used to use a physical piece of hardware to protect our software against piracy, and this was called a HASP, hardware against software piracy. So as the model of relationship between software and hardware shifted because of virtualization, we had to move to a software-based version. That was really the only change that virtualization meant to us as a vendor. And ECM kind of continued in its current model. Well, again, of course, then cloud became the next major shift. And virtualization is really the underpinnings of cloud. This server consolidation that's available in IT environments suddenly becomes so much more viable when organizations such as Amazon and Microsoft and others, and even us at Highland, said, you know what we can do? We can build an incredible, powerful server farm. We can implement these virtualization technologies, and we can take care of the hardware infrastructure, and people can pay a subscription to get access to this. And now again, when this kind of shift has happened over the last number of years, people asked us as a vendor, can I host your software in the cloud? And the answer to that was yes, of course you can. And it was a matter of installing the software as it was originally designed in this new cloud model, but we didn't really have to do anything different as a vendor. But then all of a sudden, something significant happens, because with the standardization and the expectation that software is now available in the cloud. Software is now being designed because of the technologies that are available there. And to illustrate, there are software vendors and there are applications out there that are only available via the cloud. And we are familiar with the benefits of this in our own personal life. So think about our apps on our phones through Facebook and applications like that. We install an application one time, which is a quick download, and then that application upgrades itself and it is available across a range of devices, etc. This is how software in general is being developed and deployed today. Now, not to go too technical at this point, but under the covers, to allow these types of modern software environments to happen is a whole range of technologies. There's a concept which made possible with a technology called Docker of virtualized containers, where organizations can download software applications by means of a virtual container and have that software application up and running in a matter of seconds. Yes, seconds, not minutes or hours for an installation, but seconds, and can have multiple instances of the software brought up there. The web is standardizing on a communication protocol of RESTful APIs. There's a concept of microservices under the covers, which companies like Netflix and Spotify and others are using to deliver the software that they have. And these are all the underpinnings of cloud. Now, that's all I'm going to say for here, because we're really just trying to illustrate one point. And the point is actually really simple. There's a lot changed since the late 80s and early 90s to today in 2018 from a technology point of view. A lot has changed, how software is designed, delivered, and deployed. Now, I'm going to go back to an analogy for a second and think about what was going on with Henry Ford. It's interesting to note that Henry Ford did not invent the internal combustion engine. In fact, that was first invented in the 17th century. So it was 200 years of innovation that happened before he realized he could take advantage of this and, in fact, package up the car. In fact, Ford didn't actually invent anything that was in really the car, besides the innovative way to put it together. Elon Musk also did not invent the electric car or anything like it, but he did recognize that the technology was viable and has figured out a way to make this incredibly cool and affordable now to the masses as well. So what's the point of this entire first section? The point is this: content services as a set of terminologies and words is not just a change in words. It's directly related to the dramatic shift in technology, with the expectation that software is cloud first, cloud ready, and available across a big range of devices. So the content services terminology is directly related to the technology that exists today. Now that takes us on to our second area, which is changes in technology change people's expectations. So what do we mean by that? Well, we're going to talk about the expectations of a buyer of enterprise software and ECM technologies, and then we're going to talk about the expectations of a user, because expectations today are very different to what the expectations were in the early 90s, in the early 2000s, and even in the early 2010s. So we're going to go back to our analogy just for 1 second, just to make our point. Think about the last time that you purchased a vehicle. So you're looking at the kind of car brochures and you're thinking about what is on your must-have list. Now, if you think about it, it's very interesting. And I can at least talk for myself as the last car that I purchased new. These were some of the things on my must-have list. I wasn't interested in looking at the maker model if it did not have these features. I wanted to have Bluetooth. That is an absolute necessity for the devices that we have today. I also wanted side sensors on my wing mirrors, because I've come to appreciate how safe those features are when you're driving along. A rear view camera is now something that I don't understand how I ever lived without, and that now cannot live without in my vehicle. And perhaps drawn inspiration from the latest Volkswagen model, 18 cup holders. 18 cup holders, how could we live without them? But the point is, with all of these features that were perhaps must-haves on my list today, the last time I bought a car, which was not that long ago, these features either didn't exist or they were not readily available. So why are they on my must-have list today when the last time I purchased the car I didn't even know about them? Well, it's really simply because they exist. And if I'm making a purchase, and it's hard to call a car an investment through all the depreciation that happens, if I was going to place a large amount of money in a vehicle, I'm going to want to have the latest of what's there. That same concept is absolutely true when it comes to buyers, your IT department, perhaps yourself as an IT buyer of enterprise software today. This is almost like the brochure, if you will, of enterprise software purchases. This is what's available, so therefore this is what's expected. When organizations are making strategic purchases in software now, there is no longer an expectation that they're going to go and have to purchase a host of physical servers, get them installed in their environment, and do a bunch of testing over months to get the software up and running. The expectation is the software is going to be hosted in the cloud. It's the responsibility of the vendor, and it's going to be made instantly available. It's already ready to go. The concept of software being quickly deployed. Gone are the days when organizations would sit and do compatibility testing to make sure that this new software that was being introduced to the IT stack is going to break something else that was already installed in these local client machines, because the expectation is for software to be browser-based, zero footprint, and be absolutely compatible with the latest browsers and versions of technology. The expectation, like we mentioned earlier with the example in our phones, is we don't want to have to go and go get a CD in the post from Facebook and go through an upgrade process to upgrade the software on our phones. The same thing is true with enterprise software. The upgrade should happen as soon as the features become available. And these upgrades that happen bring along new functionality. They bring fixes to areas or enhancement requests that have been made by the customers. The performance of the software is now the responsibility of the software manufacturer. And in fact, if the software doesn't perform, then we don't want to have to pay for the software for the duration that it wasn't acceptable from a performance point of view. The concept of web services is just a fundamental must-have, because any cloud-based software purchase is going to have to probably talk to other cloud-based applications that the organization relies upon, and the concept of a web services approach is just expected. And perhaps the idea where software can scale according to organizational need, where the pricing model applies to consumption more so than functionality. So the point is, all of these things are readily available in enterprise software today, and therefore are the expectations of buyers. So perhaps when we draw the correlation then back to ECM and content services, ECM, whether unfortunately or just the way the world works, has carried some baggage, because it was really kind of came to life in the early 90s and has a reputation of being more of those monolithic, premise-based software applications that are very difficult to maintain and install. Whereas the concept of content services fundamentally brings with it an understanding that the technology that is being delivered is via and meeting all the expectations that people have today with using modern development and deployment paradigms. So that's the expectations that have shifted because of the technology that's available from a buyer's point of view. But what about the user experience? So let's go back to our analogy. This is the user experience for getting around via horse. And besides the romantic notion of riding a horse and buggy, if this was your only option, especially for this poor lady with her nice white dress on, the user experience, if it was to start raining, would not be very pleasant. So the next major thing that happened then was the introduction of the Ford Model T. And when compared to riding a horse on the back of an unprotected carriage, this was an upgrade. We were protected from the elements. However, if you think about it, this required a completely new set of training as people learned how to drive a car rather than steer a horse. Well, what's interesting though is if you look at this user experience through the lens of our expectations today, you wonder how on earth people put up with this. At the time, the people that had this literally had the best that money could buy and would have enjoyed every second of it. Well, today, the only people that are going to be driving around in one of these and pretending that they're enjoying themselves is perhaps if you're a masochist or an antique car enthusiast. You're going to rattle your way down the road and enjoy the experience. Of course, I'm just kidding. But the point is, this is not what we expect from a user experience today at all, because our expectations are like this. Our expectations are one of being comfortable, connected, with all sorts of information, with heated seats, and we are definitely spoiled. We would never accept the type of user experience from a vehicle that once was literally the best that money could buy. So how does this relate to the user experience from enterprise software today and ECM? Well, this is kind of like the horse and buggy type style. It was all that was available at the time, and people put up with it, and they did their jobs, and that was that. Then along came this, and this was an upgrade. But again, we look back and we think back to what the world was like if you were around at this time, of using software at work that was only installed on your local machine, that when you had a problem with your local machine, you personally could not do anything and you would lose the work that you had been working on. This is really the equivalent of the Ford Model T. You wonder how on earth we ever put up with it, because our expectations today of enterprise software in general are this: to be having ubiquitous access across a range of devices wherever we are, and for that experience to be seamless, whether we're at home, at work, whether we're traveling, across whatever device we want. We'll draw a correlation back to technology we're used to in our personal lives with Netflix or Spotify or something like that. We expect we're at home watching on our smart TV a show, then we get in our car or wherever we're going, obviously not the driver, we pull out our mobile device, we can continue watching that show from exactly where we left off. We expect this in our personal life, and that's what people expect today from enterprise software. So again, when we draw the correlation back to ECM, ECM as a technology carries a lot of baggage as a term. Lots of training were needed originally with enterprise content management, given the fact that those early versions of the software were developed for local PCs. And at first, they did require a lot of training and required all users to adopt that same kind of work style. Whereas content services as an approach really brings with it an expectation and a reality that software applications experiences for the end user should be lightweight and tailored with intuitive, responsive applications that are upgraded and that are very simple and easy to use. That's not traditionally how ECM vendors have provided experiences, but that is absolutely the future of content services. So far we've talked about the shift in technology, which has changed people's expectations fundamentally. So how does that relate to us? In this world of managing enterprise information, this world of providing solutions which are content rich out to our end users, how does this change what we have to design and deliver? This is where we understand that the technology and the expectations result in a change of a mindset for us. 93 minutes. 93 minutes was the amount of time that it took to assemble a Ford Model T on the production line. And that's what Ford did really well. We've just talked about how Ford didn't invent the car, but the company did come out with an innovative, incredible way to assemble cars at an unprecedented cost and time, and it was this assembly model that made the cars and really kind of gave birth to this whole expectation of what people could expect and have as a family and to drive around. So the question for us is, how do we get our solution assembly line down to 93 minutes? How do we deliver value to our organization in the equivalent of an incredibly quick time? Because we can ask a question: which one of these two is most important? Is it the documents or is it the end users? And perhaps from an ECM mindset, and if anyone's been around the enterprise content management industry for a long time, the first thing that we learn about and they have learned about in the enterprise content management landscape is about documents and document types and metadata and all these types of technologies. And our approach as enterprise content management professionals was often, let me see your documents and your content and I will manage these in a spectacular manner. I'll manage these in ways that will blow your mind. Well, the reality of solutions today is, yes, the documents are important, but it's the end user experience which is ultimately the most important thing. And where that end user experience needs some content, where they need to be able to access discrete pieces of data, it's more on the end user. So this is the next shift that we're talking about in content services. A content services approach focuses more on the usage of the content more than the management of the content. So let's draw the correlation again back to our analogy and see what Ford figured out for how to assemble a car in 93 minutes. And we'll see if there's a correlation to how we develop solutions in an equally appealingly short time. Because Ford really understood that if they could break down a car into easy to manufacture components, they would be able to assemble the car in a very quick fashion. So let's talk about some of the components that go into a Model T. Of course, there's the engine, that's a must. There's also a fuel tank and a way to ingest fuel to power the engine. There are wheels, obviously. There are doors and a chassis on the vehicle. There are tools in order to see both what's happening within the engine and what's happening around, so visibility tools, and security. Now, security is actually interesting because this was not part of the original Ford Model T design. In fact, reportedly, Ford used to take along a padlock and chain his vehicle to a fence because otherwise anyone could have come along and cranked the engine and driven off in his vehicle. So security at first wasn't really that important, but became more important. It wasn't until the Cadillac 53 that the first T starting engine came along, and we know that security, obviously, perhaps it's a sign of the times or whatever, but has become more and more and more important when it comes to a component in a vehicle. But the point is we break down this car into these components. So we could probably categorize these in a certain way. There are a way to capture and ingest the fuel. There's a way to manage and process that fuel, connecting through a drivetrain to those wheels, an integrated drivetrain to create momentum for the vehicle. There's obviously a way to get into the vehicle, analytical tools in order to understand what's going on, and security. Nice, easy to understand categories. Well, when we look at a modern car, are the component types any different? Well, no. The component types are identical in nature, but far more advanced in design. When we think about the types of fuel from electricity all the way through to diesel, there's a whole spectrum of types of fuel that can be ingested. The engines then accordingly will manage those types of fuel sources in different manners. A car still needs wheels to create momentum. Those wheels are a bit snazzier looking now, and the drivetrains have got an upgrade, but that integration between the engine and the wheels is still very much important. Of course, we still need to have a nice exterior, but that exterior now is slick. The analytical tools are no longer just analog, but all connected through computers in the engine. And security has moved beyond a padlock into a model of encryption, where your key identifies you as an individual. And oftentimes when you use your own key fob to open a car, the seats and wing mirrors are just for you. So the components are still effectively the same, but each and every single one of them has got an upgrade. So when we think about content services, we can think about content services in the same set of components. And if you've been around the ECM world for quite some time, you'll know that this paradigm of looking at all the different types of technologies that are available, you'll see that it probably sounds familiar, because in fact, this is how we used to educate people on enterprise content management and say, these are all the different pieces of an ECM solution. The fact with content services is that the technology that exists today, every single one of these has got an incredible upgrade. And the tools that are available, from capture information from the start of the information lifecycle all the way through to that retention and destruction, are far more sophisticated than they were in the early 90s. But there is something significant in this shift, because in this analogy, we just want to address one question, and this is part of the shift from ECM to content services. If these are the components that make up a car, what does the car in this analogy symbolize? Because arguably, with an ECM mindset, the car would symbolize your entire organization. ECM delivered this promise of being able to have one single system that would manage the information for your entire organization. So choosing a few of these categories to illustrate, the original design would say we're wanting to identify and classify every single important piece of information across your whole organization. And we want to come up with a taxonomy that is going to work for users in every single department. This is why ECM deployment sometimes took years of design and implementation, and oftentimes never ever reached full completion because we were trying to address the needs of the whole organization. No, in a content services approach, the tools and components are very similar in nature to the tools and components that have been there with enterprise content management all along, but the mindset is we're not trying to fix the problems of the world with one piece of software. We are trying to approach an individual solution. This is a fundamental part of how a content services mindset comes along. We're going to use the tools that are necessary for the driver of the solution, if you will. If you think about any car, when you go on a road trip, and let's say you're going on a road trip, I live in Ohio, let's say you're driving to Florida, you're not going to take all the fuel that you need with you for your entire journey. You're going to take the right amount of fuel for the right stage in the journey that you go. So when we think about capturing for a solution, we're not trying to capture all the information in an organization, just the information that's required for that solution, and in the most important way, in the most efficient way. We want the right tools. For example, we think of capture tools being like scanning, but perhaps with a scanning tool, we can, rather than just thinking of capture being scanning, we think of how that information is coming in for that end user. Perhaps it's not coming in through paper at all. Perhaps it's coming in through email attachments, or it's coming in through electronic forms from a customer portal. We want to quickly capture that information and do something with it and get it into the hands of the right people. So as much as there's technology involved in content services, it's this content services mindset, which is more focused on the needs of an end user for a specific solution, rather than trying to address the needs of the whole organization. Really, the question here is, what does the driver need? In this case, what specific functionality within each of these categories are required to build an individual solution? That's a lot more liberating than facing a 3 to 5 year project of trying to fix your entire organization's information management woes. So the challenge is then, how do you deliver solutions as fast as a Model T with the user experience of a Tesla? Because that is the challenge that we all have today. So what does a content services approach look like then? How can we glue all of these concepts that we've talked about together? Well, what we've talked about so far are 3 different things. We've talked about content services being an embracement, if that's even a word, of the latest technologies. And the technologies that exist from an IT landscape, as we've mentioned, cloud-first, mobile-friendly, responsive applications, using those technologies to deliver the range of content services capabilities. And there's a mindset involved, a mindset that is looking to solve the needs of a user in a specific solution rather than the needs of a whole department. It's the combination of these 3 things together that really sums up a content services approach. So what I'm going to do now is show a short demo video of how these pieces come together. And this starts off by explaining how web technology and how websites are designed have a direct bearing on how content services applications will look like in the future. So I'm going to play some of this video right here.
Every day we interact with web pages on the internet. Behind the scenes of every web page is HTML. And HTML is comprised of a series of tags. These tags define what type of content should be on the page. If you were to look at the makeup of a website, you'll see that it is made up of these tags. These tags also have attributes. Let's look at a basic image tag. One of the image tag's attributes is SRC, short for source. If we were to set the SRC attribute to the URL of an image, the website would display that image. This same principle is used to develop applications using web components. Web components allow developers to create their own tags. Here we have a tag named the OB viewer. This tag would denote where the on-base viewer component should be used. As in the Highland logo example, these tags also have attributes. As a simple example here, we can see that we are telling OnBase which document to display by setting the document ID attribute on the web component. This is an example of a customer-facing website. Here they are featuring their range of products, which in this case is a smoothie. Now, they wish to embed a document which is stored in OnBase related to this product. The developer is then able to utilize the HTML tag concept and insert the OB viewer HTML tag. In this case, for simplicity, the developer is going to specify the specific document that they want to see. Going back to the web page, we can see how straightforward and simple it is to embed an OnBase component. But we're not just creating a single web component. We're building an entire catalog of OnBase functionality, all provided through web components. Here we have an example of a web-based application built using more components. You'll see that this is in a browser, but when we go full screen, it looks and feels just like a regular application. Next to the document viewer component, we have the keyword component, the workflow actions component, and also the notes component for simple collaboration. Here's a more detailed example. With this sample application, we have combined components from multiple applications, and we will begin by retrieving the documents we wish to see from OnBase. We will then pull up the associated information from within ShareBase. You'll notice that in this interface, we're able to drag and drop documents from one application to another seamlessly. Once we're happy with all this activity, we will now go over to our third-party application component and view the related information there. Within this third-party application, there's a link to the resume. You'll notice that this pulls up directly from an integration with OnBase. And finally, we will generate an offer letter where this button triggers OnBase workflow and associated technology.
So I'm going to stop right there. If you would like to see the rest of this demo video and how we are bringing these components together, please contact us after this. We'll be happy to show you some more of the types of things that we're working on. What this illustrated is how we're able to break up ECM capabilities, content services capabilities, into simple components in order to very quickly build applications which are tailored specifically for the end user. And it is a combination that you'll see of the technologies that exist today, the capabilities, the rich set of capabilities that exist, and we have as a vendor already from a rich heritage of multiple different solutions that we have developed over the years, as well as on your behalf, a user-first mindset and thinking about how can we bring these together in a quick and responsive way. And of course, because we're embracing the latest technologies, these applications that we're building are beautifully seamless across different range of devices and form-fitting and responsive and all the things that we would expect. So in review, we've talked about a lot already, but talked about the relationship between the shift in technology and how the shift to the content services terminology is absolutely fundamentally connected together. The shift in expectations from buyers and end users absolutely have to shift and change how we think about the technologies that we're supporting and that we are rolling out within our organizations and the types of solutions that we're delivering. Again, with that goal of getting our solution delivery time down to the equivalent of that 93 minutes, a rapid solution and application delivery for multiple unique tailored solutions for all your departments within the organization. That's really the goal. So we started off by talking about faster horses. That was the question. So when we've been looking at the shift of ECM to content services, if we're just thinking that this is more of the same with just a bunch of new words, then we're definitely missing the boat, because we've already discovered for years that the answer to an organization's information management challenges is not throwing more ECM at the problem. We don't want to end up with 6 or 20 or 100 different ECM applications. We need to stop worrying about the number of repositories of where the information is and start thinking about how we can take a content services approach to bring that information together, the exact right information for the right user at the right time on a device and application that they're going to be the most efficient with. So we'll come back to our title of our presentation. We asked the question about this phrase, this British phrase about, is it just horses for courses? And earlier on, I gave a kind of a definition, which was true, of how this phrase is often used to encourage people to stick to what they know best. So I'd actually like to use a better definition, and this is the noun as found in the dictionary. Horses for courses is the practice of choosing the best response for a situation, the best means to a specific end. And that is exactly what a content services approach is all about, from a technology, from a component point of view, and how we decide to build applications to meet the needs of our end users. So that brings us to the point where we'd like to open up for any questions that you may have. So I'll ask our moderator if we have any questions that have been submitted thus far.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. We have a couple of questions that have come through. The first one is content services meant for the enterprise? ECM seemed to emphasize that it was a platform for your entire organization. Is the same true with content services?
That's a really good question, and thank you for who submitted that one. Content services as a discipline absolutely applies to the enterprise, but it's all about how we're going to address those enterprise challenges. So ECM of old was really much around, as we mentioned, addressing all the enterprise challenges all in one big gigantic project with one huge monolithic application that all users shared. The approach of content services is going to provide solutions across an enterprise, but allow a much more flexible way to get there. And what's interesting in this these types of disciplines, when we think about the discipline of managing information and content and all the tools and the capture technologies and the ways to arrange and classify information, we think about the tools and the discipline and the skills it requires to do that. And then the fundamental part of content services, which is connecting that information to the other related systems and applications which people use every day. We take those disciplines, and when we apply those disciplines and technologies to an accounts payable process, we're able to automate and make that process very efficient. We then take that same skill set, the same toolkit, and the same disciplines, and we apply it to the HR onboarding process, for example, and we are now doing the same stuff, but with a different set of information and a different set of processes, but we're able to solve that problem too. And then we think about approaching something like contract management, which requires a lot of documents and collaboration. And we take these same range of content services, add to those, and we start applying the same things to a contract management application. And then we could go on and on. You start thinking about a student transfer process between schools or patient records in managing clinical information so that the physicians can get all the information they need. I've got loads of examples to say, but I'll draw the line there. This approach gives us the tools, the discipline, and the mindset to quickly solve the needs of a specific department, but not be locked in to just one department solution, but be able to actually address the very unique considerations across multiple places of the organization. I'm sorry that answer was so long. I got quite excited answering it, but that was a good question.
Perfect, thank you. Another one is, who drives content services initiatives? Is it the business or IT or a mix of both?
That is another really good question. So we actually were recently at the AIM conference, where the topic of content services and AIM's approach to this kind of whole terminology as they define with intelligent information management was really kind of the theme of the conference. And we asked that question in one of our roundtables: who within your organization is driving digital transformation projects? Who is in charge of a content services approach? And we got a split 50-50 in those answers. In some organizations, it's the IT side of the house that are very much involved. In others, it's the business side of the house that are driving the conversation. One of the interesting things that we did talk about and discover is the unique job roles that are popping up in order to take these projects enterprise-wide, or at least to take the discipline enterprise-wide. So things like a chief transformation officer or a chief digital officer were roles that people have either hired or were looking to hire, with the heart of those roles being one to get a grip on an organization's information strategy and drive solutions in a consolidated way across their environment. So again, it's a very interesting question, and every organization has kind of taken a different approach. So it's kind of about all across the board.
Perfect, thank you. We have one last question that's come in. In your presentation, you said upgrades and enhancements can take place faster than with on-premise systems. Does this mean if I use content services for my invoice approval solution, I can make enhancements immediately rather than waiting for our entire system to be upgraded?
So that's another excellent question. So thinking about cloud technology doesn't really require a lot of explanation. So I'll talk about cloud first of all, then draw the correlation to on-premises. So we understand that when the software vendor is hosting a cloud application, and if it's designed correctly, when they introduce upgrades or changes, that those can be rolled out relatively quickly or very easily to the users of the cloud-based application, because this vendor has control of the environment and makes those changes and can roll them out and do all the necessary testing on their site. On-premise deployments of any enterprise software obviously is a little bit of a different consideration, because the software versioning is being installed on the servers in the local machine, and often it's the IT department that has the responsibility for the upgrade process. So like application design of old really required kind of, you call it the weekend upgrade party, because an upgrade would require, off hours IT departments to get together and oftentimes upgrade multiple applications while they're there, while they've got the downtime approved, and make the upgrades. And that's been part of the challenge with kind of monolithic software design. There are technologies which are at the heart of a cloud deployment model, which will make it very much easier for on-premise organizations to get their hands on enhancements much quicker. I mentioned, and this could be a whole nother webinar, but I mentioned earlier the concept of software containers, and I also mentioned the concept of microservices. This is what software vendors are using in order to break up elements of their software into little chunks, if you will. And those chunks are what are underneath the software and the cloud deployment that the software vendor can upgrade individually. These same things are being made available to on-premise customers, so that the local deploy is really taking advantage of these newer concepts. So on-premise customers are starting to ask, our on-premise customers are starting to ask us things like, are you providing your software via containers and microservices? And when we can deliver the software, and while we're delivering the software through containers and microservices, it's going to enable on-premise customers to upgrade individual pieces of the software much quicker without having to take their whole IT environment down over the weekend and introduce changes in a much more rapid manner. So it's a little more, when you're a cloud-based, it all happens for you, but we're absolutely pursuing that same concept for on-premise customers to make it much easier and faster to get their hands on enhancements. I covered a lot of that question too. I'm on a roll today, but hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. That's all the questions for today. That was great.
All right. Well, with that, I thank you everyone for your participation today and spending the time out of your days. And with that, I say a big thank you to you all. Thanks.
Have a good day, everybody.